In this video, I'm going to go over everything you need to do to complete the beauty editing project. First thing that you're going to need to do is create a new document, and you'll change the dimensions, but always make sure that it's roughly around 11 inches by 8.5, roughly printer paper size, and 300 resolution. What you need for this project is a resource image of somebody with a scar or a blemish or some sort of acne, because I'm going to teach you how to remove that. So insert your image, and we're going to put it on the left. I'm going to OK it. And then what you're going to need to do is you're going to need to create a duplicate of it. And we're going to need twice the amount of space. So we can already see that I'm changing the size of my canvas. That's OK. I'm going to come over to the crop tool. I'm going to drag it over. I'm going to make this twice as long. There we go. Now I'm going to create a quick copy of this. And a way that we can create a copy without having to use copy or paste is by using the Move tool and holding down Option. That might be Alt for those of you that are on not a Mac. And then while holding Option, click and move, and then you'll release, and it'll create a new copy. That copy will also be on a different layer. So I'm going to name the one on my left my before, one on the right is going to be my after, and I'm going to rasterize the image on the right by right-clicking and then coming down to rasterize. Now we can edit that one, and I'm not going to do anything to the before, so I'm going to come here and lock it. Last thing that we're going to do, just in case there's any more confusion, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the type tool, and I'm going to write out before and after. I'll make sure that those are on a new layer. So make sure that your color is something bright so that it stands out. I like red, but I might change that later. Get my type tool. And it doesn't have to be too big, but there we go. So before, and again, you can do the same thing on the Move tool. I can hold down Option, click and move, and looks like it's right that both of these are below, so I'm going to bring them to the top. And now before and before, I'll click on that with my type tool, and I will change it. Now I have my before, I have my after. And I like it a little bit over where her hair is, just because it's a little bit darker and it seems less obnoxious. Now those are both on my top layers, and I'm going to lock those so that I don't have to worry about them. Now on to the actual editing. First thing that I want you to do is go to your layers, go to your background, and unlock it. You can do that by clicking on the little lock or clicking on the lock at the top. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use my paint bucket tool, and I'm going to hide these other layers so it's easier to see. As you can see, mine is a little bit two-tone. But I'm going to choose a different color and make it look, I don't know, something kind of interesting. Let's go with kind of a pumpkin-y orange. I'll use the paint bucket tool, which is quick button G, and I will fill this in so that it's one solid color. And I had to click a couple times to remove that little line, but now we have a solid orange back there. So I'll turn back on my other layers. And what you're going to do is you are going to work on your after picture, and we're going to create a mask. So create a quick selection. And while you're creating that selection, I want you to get close to the hair, but you do not need to get all the way up and get each individual small hair. Try to think big locks, but make sure that you get all of that and that you get the face. I'm doing this quickly, so I'm using the lasso tool, though I would suggest using the pen tool to do this, to do that accurately. Now that I have the face selected, I'm going to get the tiny little hairs by going to select and mask at the top. I like bringing down the opacity just a little bit so that we can see. I'm going to move my canvas over. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to change to the Refine Edge brush tool. I'm going to size up my brush by using the bracket keys, or you could size it down using the left bracket key. And I'm going to brush over the edge where the hair is. And what that'll try to do is it'll try to figure out where all the little hairs are, and it'll try to find the edge. It's not a perfect tool, but it does a pretty good job. If your computer is on the slower end, it's better to save before you do this because it might crash. Now, that's a pretty good job. You can kind of see that it's selected some of the hairs. Didn't get all of them on this edge, but it started to select off little parts of the highlights of the hair. If I zoom in, you can see that there's little bits of red that are going to be removed from the selection. And I don't want that, so I'm going to come to the brush and I'm going to tell it to add those by painting over a little bit. And that'll keep the highlights. So I want the highlights right there. It looks like this spot is a little bit strange, so I'm going to switch back to my refining brush. Try to get it to remove those parts. Sometimes sizing down to get it a little bit more accurate. There we go. Looks pretty good on this side. Make sure I don't lose any of the chin or any of the lips or skin. There we go. Now that I have everything selected that I want and everything that I don't want unselected, I'm going to press OK. And that's going to create a selection that keeps the stray hairs. Now, what I want to teach you is how to crop things out without actually deleting things. This can be very helpful for delicate things like hair, but also for things that you might want to return selections. So after you have your selection, what you're going to do is you're going to come up to the Layers palette. And down at the bottom, you're going to use one of these ones. You're going to come down to the bottom, and what you're going to do is you're going to check off the one that looks like a square with a little circle cut out of it. This is called the Adding Mask layer. So what it does is it adds a layer that masks, which means hides. And you can see, I'm going to zoom in, that if we look at their super tiny little thumbnail, what it does is everything that's in white, it shows, and everything that's in black, it hides. So since we only selected where the head is, we can see that it's masked or hidden everything else. Now we can go back to working again. If you ever want to change any sections, like notice how over by the lips here, it's a little bit strange, and I have some stray hairs as well as I have portions of the lips that seem like they're going missing. What I can do is in the Layers palette, notice how there's this little box around the layer I'm working on. I can click on the thumbnail of the masking layer. Now this is allowing me to edit the masking layer, and it'll change my brushes. So notice that it used to be orange. It's changed my brush colors to black and white. Black means hidden, and white means show. So when I use something like a brush tool, I can hide things or show things depending on what I'm painting. notice that if I paint over this, and right now it's on black, it's hiding it. It's starting to show it as orange. But if I switch those colors really quick so that I'm using white, white shows. So it's kind of erasing the orange and showing the skin. So you might have to do a little bit of finessing to get everything just the way that you want it. It should be worth it in the end. So there we go, exactly the way that I want it. The next step that you're going to be doing is removing the blemishes. Now there's two different tools that you can use to remove blemishes. The first one has more control, and the second one is a little bit easier, but a little bit more random. So the first one that I'm going to show you, over in your toolbar, there is a thing that looks like a little stamp. This is called the clone stamp tool. So we're going to click on the clone stamp tool, make sure that it's on the standard one. And what it does is it functions a little like a brush. So I'm going to zoom over here over to the face. So if I want to remove a blemish, what I'm going to do is I'm going to size my brush to the size that I want it. And you can use the bracket keys, or you can use the properties in the top bar. You're going to choose a sample spot. So notice if I press Option or Alt on a PC, it's going to choose a secondary place. When I click on that, then let go, it'll allow me to steal something from over where I put my sample and put it over into another area. And notice how it started turning it orange. The reason why I did that is because I forgot to change layers. So let's kind of go over, make sure that I'm on the right layer, that I'm actually on the layer and not the masking layer. And we'll come back here and we'll try this once again. So Option to choose an area, and I'll draw it in. Notice that the edges are a little bit too hard. So I gotta change my properties. I'm gonna bring down, I like the opacity as high, but let's have this would be a soft brush as opposed to a really hard brush. That'll make the transitions a lot better. So we'll get a closer sample this time, and I'll paint that over. So I can sample, paint over, sample, paint, and I can paint and drag, but sometimes it's better to do little clicks at a time because that works more smoothly. So I'm going to remove any blemishes that I don't think are necessary on her forehead, making sure that I Option click, sample, and then paint over. So that's one tool. The other tool is the spot healing brush tool. It might be in your tools palette, but if it's not, know that there's tons of other tools located in this little ellipses, the ... for extra tools. So if I click on this, notice that it was one of the tools that I was using last, but there are tons of other tools hidden in here. What we want is the spot healing brush tool. And it looks like a Band-Aid with like a circle because it has a brush. So I'm going to click on that. And what that one does, zoom in over here so we can see the face, is that it functions like a brush. Except what it does is it samples everything that's around it and tries to erase it. So I'm going to click and notice it had like a dark area. But then once I let go, it tried to figure out what was around it. Be careful. Don't just do really large areas at a time because it sometimes freaks out and it doesn't know what to copy. It can also take a really long time. Look and see how bad of a job this one did. It started pulling things from the background as well as the words and colors from other areas. So I'm going to do that, and I'm going to do little sections at a time. And you all can use whichever method you want, and that'll change depending on what things you need to do. So I'm going to speed up the video and do some healing. There we go. Try not to make everything one clean blank slate. You want to make sure that you keep the highlights where the highlights should be and keep the shadows where the shadows should be. And a couple of blemishes here and there are all right. That's what makes us human. You don't want to make aliens necessarily. But there we go. You can already see that there's a world of difference changed from between the before and the after. But we're not going to start there. We're going to do a couple other little changes. Next up, we're going to use the liquefy tool. So with the liquefy tool, what you're going to do is that you can liquefy a selection, so you can make a selection over one specific area, or you can liquefy whole layers. I'm going to make sure that I'm on my correct layer. And then I'm going to come up to filter and then liquefy. Make sure you choose the liquefy ... and not just whatever the last thing was that you were doing. I would save before I go into here because since it's a filter, it's going to be doing a lot of work. Notice how the buttons on the right side have changed. I am going to change into the magnifying glass, and I can zoom out with minus or zoom in with plus. But I'm going to zoom it in so it's focused on the face so that I can think about what things I want to change. And I don't think I want to change a lot of things with her. Nothing that I can think of. I actually think she's gorgeous, and she just needed a little bit of acne cleaning. But there's a lot of interesting tools that you can use here. Both tools on the right as well as tools on the left. But we'll focus on the tools on the left for the time being. The forward warping tool pushes things. So if I click and drag, notice how it warps things that way. And that can be used to move things up a little bit or down a little bit if I wanted to kind of like make her cheekbones feel a little bit saggier. Or if I wanted to make her, if I make this brush a little bit smaller, I could actually make it look like she was frowning if I do it correct. And it's better to do little things instead of big things. I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to give her a more elegant looking neck. So I'm going to make my brush kind of big and do a couple of little pushes. Nothing too much, but some to make her her neck look thinner. And it's already doing a great job with the hair. So I don't have to do much. I'm going to trim in her ear just a little bit. And you want to do little amounts at a time. Try not to go too crazy. Other brushes that you can do is that there is this the pucker tool and the bloat tool. I would avoid the clockwise spinning tools because those are really silly. But bloat tool, the pucker tool makes things smaller. So if I wanted to, I don't know, make her lips just a little bit smaller. You see, if I click and hold it, it's going to make it super tiny, and it pulls everything in from where your section was. I'm gonna, I don't think I really want to do much. I like her. This is hard. Ethical choices. But let's say maybe we want to make her nose just a little bit more narrow. So there we go. And then very traditional beauty type things is making eyes bigger and noses smaller. So I'm going to make her eyes just a little bit larger to really emphasize those lovely lashes that she has. So there we go. Little changes, and once you're happy with what you have, press OK. Again, make small changes. Try not to go too crazy. And try to be ethical. So that is the liquefy tool. The liquefy tool can be really nice for making small adjustments. It can also be good for making really nasty adjustments too if you play around too much. After that, let's play with some color selections. So we're going to try to make a new selection. I'm going to come up to the top bar. I'm going to go to select, and then you can select color range. This is a neat little tool. So once I click on that, what it's going to do, it's going to mask everything that's there. And I can change how the mask looks, whether it's black, whether it's white, and it just only shows what's there, or whether it's like a red mask. Red mask is relatively traditional. And what you can do is it'll allow you to eyedrop somewhere on this, and it's going to try to pick out all of that color. So if I wanted to make a selection that was only the orange, you can see, just like before, it's going to try to select things that are orange. And I can change the fuzziness, which is how tolerant or intolerant it is with that. So high tolerance allows for everything that's kind of orange-like, such as red is close to orange, and skin tones are actually pretty close to orange. But if I lower the tolerance, it only accepts orange. There's a couple other possible things that you guys can do. Sometimes they have, it'll allow you to choose by color, and sometimes they'll allow you to choose skin tone. So I'm going to choose skin tone, and this does a pretty good job of choosing the skin tone. But you can see that it's choosing on both sides, so I'm probably going to have to change that later. I'm going to reduce the fuzziness because it looks like it's picking up some along the edges of the hair. But if I reduce it down too much, notice that there's nothing, and then notice on this one it's avoiding the shadows. So we're going to pull that up so that everything that I want is perfect. Notice how it's just made a selection of everything that exists. So we're going to need to edit this again. So I'm going to come over to one of my selection tools. I like the lasso tool. And you can use the plus or minus located in the top to add to selections or subtract to selections. Or you can come to select and mask and use that to change things like we have done before. I can already see the things that I want to add, so it's super easy. So I'm going to take away the face on the other side, so nothing gets changed over there. And I can see that I'm losing some bits in the ear, which is strange. So I'm going to add those ones, changing it to the plusing one. Losing some in this shadow here, which is kind of weird. I'm losing at those, at the letters. I don't want to catch any of these like stray hairs. So I'm going to cut those off. So now I've made my selection that just focuses on the skin. It looks like I could have done a little bit more on the base near the neck, but I think that'll be okay since it's mostly in the shadow. So now that I've selected the skin, and if you wanted to do opposite and select just the hair or something like that, you could have. But try to make a selection of just one area. And what we're going to do is we're going to create an adjustment. I'm going to give her a bit of a tan. So I'm going to come to Image, Adjustments, and then you can play around with things here. So I'm going to play around with brightness and contrast, and then hue and saturation. I think I want to hit hue and saturation first, because I want to give her a little bit more color. So you can play around with this a lot and give her a lot of color, and mostly weird colors. But I'm going to deepen her skin tone just a little bit. Saturation is how colorful it is, or how not colorful it is. So I'm going to bump up the saturation so that there's some warmth in it. I'm going to bring the lightness down just a little bit. I think I want to do this again. I'm going to come to Image and Adjustments. This time, brightness and contrast. And I'm going to give her a little bit more contrast. So there's my shadows are a little bit darker. Try not to go all the way to the edge because that feels kind of fake or too desaturated. Actually, I think lowering the contrast is making her skin not have too many dramatic shadows. So it's actually making it smooth out just a little bit. So I think that's pretty good. You could change the hair if you wanted to, or other parts, but I'm pretty happy with this. So now that I don't need this anymore, I can deselect the selection by coming to Select and Deselect. The very last technique that I'm going to show you is how to alter colors in small areas using a couple little tricky things. So one of them is using blending layers. So I'm going to create a blending layer. I'm going to create a new layer just over my after layer. I'm going to name this Makeup. What I want to do is I want to change her lipstick color. And what I'm going to do is I think I want to give her kind of a crazy bright orange. I'm going to change it to the brush tool. I like soft edge brushes because that gives me a little bit more control. And I'm going to make it a little bit smaller so I can focus on it. Now, notice how I'm just painting over this normally, and it's painting over 100%. So that way, unfortunately, we're not going to be able to see unless we paint down like on little amounts at a time. And that's still not ideal. So sometimes what you want to do is change the blending properties. So I'm going to come back to my layers, and on my makeup layer, if I kind of focus in at the top, on my layers, notice how right now it says normal. This is my blending layers. And when I click on this, this has a bunch of different ways that I can blend it. And what that means is it blends the top layer with whatever is below it, the lower layer. So I'm going to zoom out so that you guys can see. But as I go through this, it shows me some possibilities. The first ones are darkening things. The next section is lightening things. The next section is different ways to blend. They're kind of like a little strange. The last ones get a little bit weird, but personally, what I like is I like adding color. So I'm going to add color just because I want to make this orange. So now everywhere I paint, it's going to blend in the top with the bottom. So now I have a little bit more control to get exactly the color that I want. And I can even erase from this section. If I go a little bit too far, which I did a little. We don't really want her to have clown makeup now, do we? So there we go. Played with the blending layers, and now she looks like she's wearing lipstick, or she wasn't originally wearing lipstick. You can do this with a couple of different ways. There's another tool that's kind of fun. You can add a little bit more. I'm going to go on the dramatic side of things. Another tool that you can possibly use is the color replacement brush tool. So what that looks like is it looks like a brush, except it's got a little square and a little exchange mark. So when I click on that, what that'll do is it'll change some of my properties of how it blends, as well as changing my brush. Now, what the color replacement tool does is when I am working in a section and I'm painting, what it does is it tries to keep what is below it, and then it changes those colors. Problem is, it needs to happen on the layer that you're working on. So I have to change on the face layer. And I can't turn it on and off like my makeup layer. So while my makeup layer was forgiving because it's a separate layer that's just blended downward, if I'm doing it on my natural layer, the color replacement tool changes it forever. But that's what the undo button is for. So you can see I'm painting in with this orange color, and it's keeping most of the same information, but it's replacing the color. I don't like that. Nope, not one bit. But those are possibilities. And I'm going to have it add a little bit of the hue to kind of give it more of a rosiness to her eyes. I'm going to play with the color a little bit, and we'll see if we can make anything better. You don't have to be a perfect makeup artist to make this interesting. You just have to have some fun. So there we have it. Just a little bit of silliness, showing you guys how to do some beauty editing techniques. Again, feel free to watch this video as much as you need to, and pause it when you have to. Make sure that you use each of the techniques, and again, it's smarter to go on the subtle side than it is to be completely crazy.